Her billionaire dad swore never to love again. Then she introduced her friend's mother. He swore he'd never love again. Until the woman who cleaned his penthouse showed him how to live again. What began as dinner for their daughters became the story that healed two broken souls and proved that love can bloom even after loss. Before we begin, please kindly subscribe to this channel, like, comment, and share. I'll be so glad if this story reaches hearts across the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom. Hello, my wonderful family. Welcome back to your family channel, Sammy Stories. May the Almighty bless you all with peace that calms every storm, courage that never breaks, and a light so divine it guides generations. May your hearts bloom with kindness, your voices carry wisdom, and your love remain the heartbeat of every home. Amen. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite like 1,000 desperate fingers seeking entry into a fortress that had long ago sealed itself shut. Marcus Wellington stood motionless, his silhouette dark against the stormlit skyline of Manhattan, a glass of single-malt whiskey untouched in his hand. The amber liquid caught the lightning's flash, momentarily illuminating the emptiness that had become his constant companion. 42 years old, devastatingly handsome with salt and pepper hair that only enhanced his commanding presence, Marcus was a man who had everything money could buy and nothing his heart desired. Wellington Industries had grown from his father's modest real estate business into a global empire spanning technology, finance, and luxury hospitality. Forbes had recently named him the 18th richest man in America. His net worth exceeded $12 billion. Yet none of it mattered anymore. It had been 5 years, 3 months, and 17 days since Caroline died. 5 years since the cancer had stolen his wife, his partner, his soulmate from this world and left him hollowed out like an abandoned building. He had counted every single day, marked each one like a prisoner scratching tallies on a cell wall, because the counting was the only thing that made time feel real anymore. Daddy. The soft voice behind him belonged to the one remaining light in his darkened world. Sophia Wellington, 13 years old, stood in the doorway of his home office wearing her school uniform and carrying her backpack. Her mother's eyes looked back at him, that same shade of hazel green that could shift from forest to ocean depending on her mood. Those eyes were both his greatest treasure and his deepest wound. "Hey, princess." Marcus set down his glass and turned, forcing his face into what he hoped passed for a smile. "How was school?" Sophia's expression told him she wasn't fooled. She never was. The girl had inherited her mother's emotional intelligence along with her eyes, which meant she could read him like a balance sheet. "It was fine. Dad, you promised you'd eat lunch today. Mrs. Chen said you cancelled your midday meeting and stayed in your office." Marcus felt a flash of irritation at his assistant for reporting his activities to his daughter, followed immediately by guilt. Mrs. Chen was only doing what Sophia had probably asked her to do: keep tabs on him. "I had work to do." "You always have work to do." Sophia walked further into the room, dropping her backpack by one of the leather chairs. "That's not the same as taking care of yourself." "Infine, Sophia." The words came out sharper than he intended, and he watched her flinch slightly. The guilt intensified, settling into his chest like a stone. "I'm sorry. I'm just tired." "You're always tired." She moved to the window beside him, and together they looked out at the storm ravaging the city below. "Mom wouldn't want you to be like this." The mention of Caroline sent the familiar spike of pain through his heart. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself against the wave of grief that never quite receded, that simply waited beneath the surface of every moment for something to disturb it. "Your mother would want you to focus on your homework, not worry about me." "Someone has to worry about you." Sophia's voice was small but determined. "Because you've stopped worrying about yourself." Marcus looked down at his daughter. When had she gotten so tall? She'd be taller than Caroline had been in another year or two. The thought brought both comfort and pain. "I worry about you. That's all that matters." "That's not all that matters, and you know it." Sophia turned to face him fully, her young face far too serious for her age. "Dad, I know you miss Mom. I miss her too, every single day. But she's gone, and we are still here, and we have to actually live. Not just exist." The words struck him with unexpected force. When had his 13-year-old daughter become wise enough to see through him so clearly? "Sophia, I'm worried about you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back with a determination that reminded him painfully of Caroline. "You don't laugh anymore. You don't really smile. You work all the time, and when you're not working, you're just absent. Like you're here but not really here." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. He pulled Sophia into a hug, pressing his face into her hair. She still used the same lavender shampoo Caroline had bought for her, and the scent threatened to undo him completely. "I am sorry, princess. I'm trying." "I know you are." Sophia's voice was muffled against his chest. "But maybe trying isn't enough. Maybe you need help." "I don't need." "Dad." She pulled back to look at him. "When was the last time you did something that made you happy? Really happy? Something that wasn't about work or taking care of me?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer and found he couldn't. When had he last felt joy? Real, uncomplicated joy. He could remember happiness with Caroline, laughter with Caroline, peace with Caroline. But since she'd been gone, there had only been the mechanical progression of days, the endless treadmill of responsibility, and the crushing weight of a grief that never lightened. "I thought so." Sophia's expression softened with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "I have an idea. I know you probably won't like it, but will you at least think about it?" "What kind of idea?" Marcus was immediately suspicious. Sophia had been dropping hints lately about him dating, suggestions he'd shut down without hesitation. The thought of being with someone who wasn't Caroline felt like a betrayal of everything they'd shared. "Not dating," Sophia said quickly, reading his expression. "I know you're not ready for that. Maybe you'll never be ready, and that's okay. But Dad, you need friends. You need people in your life who aren't employees or business associates. You need someone to talk to besides me." "I have people I talk to." Even as he said it, Marcus knew it was a lie. His entire life had contracted to 2 points: work and Sophia. Everything else had fallen away. Name one friend you've had over for dinner in the past year. Sophia crossed her arms, waiting. One person you've done something social with that wasn't business-related. The silence stretched between them. Marcus couldn't name anyone. After Caroline died, his friend had tried at first: invitations to dinners, sporting events, weekends away. He'd declined them all until they stopped asking. He'd told himself he was too busy, that he needed to focus on Sophia and the business. But the truth, which his daughter seemed to understand better than he did, was that he'd simply stopped engaging with life. "There's this thing at school next week," Sophia continued. "A mother-daughter tea for the 8th grade class. It's supposed to help us connect with the school community before we start high school next year." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Sophia, I can come to school events. I know I'm not your mother, but it's specifically for mothers and daughters." Sophia held up a hand to forestall his protest. "I know it's old-fashioned and kind of exclusionary, but it's tradition. The thing is, my friend Emma doesn't have a mom either. Her mom died when she was 7, and Emma's been asking her aunt to come, but her aunt lives in California and can't make it." "I'm sorry to hear that." Marcus wasn't sure where this was going. "That must be hard for Emma." "It is. But Emma's grandmother helps take care of her. Her name is Mrs. Grace Martinez, and she's amazing." Sophia's face lit up in a way Marcus hadn't seen in months. "She's Emma's best friend's mom. Well, that's confusing. Let me explain better." Marcus listened as Sophia outlined the relationships. Emma Martinez lived with her grandmother, Grace Martinez, a widow who had taken in her orphan granddaughter after Emma's mother, Grace's daughter, had died in a car accident. Emma's best friend was another girl named Lily Chen, whose mother had recently passed away from a stroke. Grace had essentially become a surrogate mother figure to both girls, caring for them after school and on weekends while juggling multiple jobs to make ends meet. Mrs. Martinez is bringing both Emma and Lily to the tea, Sophia explained. And I was thinking, maybe I could ask if I could join them? If she'd be willing to have 3 daughters for the afternoon instead of 2. That way I wouldn't miss the event, and you wouldn't have to be uncomfortable trying to attend something specifically designed for mothers. Relief and sadness warred in Marcus's chest. Relief that he wouldn't have to navigate a room full of mothers and daughters while being painfully reminded of Caroline's absence. Sadness that his daughter had to make these accommodations, that she couldn't have what the other girls had, a mother to take her to special events. If you want to do that, of course. I can make a donation to the school or... That's not what I'm asking, Dad. Sophia took a breath. I want to invite Mrs. Martinez and Emma and Lily here for dinner first. This Friday. Just a casual dinner, so I can ask her in person if she'd be willing to include me in the tea party. Marcus felt his walls going up automatically. Sophia, I don't think. Please. His daughter's eyes pleaded with him. I'm not trying to replace Mom or set you up or anything like that. I just want to have friends over for dinner like a normal teenager. And Mrs. Martinez is really nice. She's not going to expect anything from you. She's just a kind person who's been through her own grief and come out the other side still able to care about people. The words hung in the air between them. Still able to care about people. Was that what Marcus had lost? The ability to care beyond his immediate circle of one? He looked at his daughter's hopeful face and felt the walls crack slightly. She asked for so little. She never complained about the modesty of their life compared to what his wealth could provide. She'd been the one to insist on public school instead of elite private academies, the one who wanted normal friends over celebrity connections. She never pressed him to move on or date or change. All she wanted was dinner with friends. Okay, he heard himself say. Friday dinner. Here. I'll have the chef prepare something nice. Sophia's face transformed with a smile. Thank you, Daddy. And actually, could we maybe not have the chef? Could we maybe just order pizza or Chinese food or something normal? Mrs. Martinez might feel weird with formal staff dinner service. Marcus felt something that might have been amusement, an emotion he'd almost forgotten existed. You want me to order takeout? I'm not sure I remember how. I'll handle it. Sophia threw her arms around him. You just have to show up and be polite. That's all. Thank you, Dad. This means a lot to me. After she'd gone to do her homework, Marcus stood at the window again, watching the storm begin to abate. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and he wondered what he'd just agreed to. The thought of strangers in his home, his sanctuary, made his chest tight with anxiety. But Sophia was right about one thing. They were still here, still alive, and existence wasn't the same as living. He picked up his phone and found himself scrolling through old photos of Caroline. There she was on their wedding day, radiant in white. There she was pregnant with Sophia, glowing with joy. There she was in the hospital holding their newborn daughter, exhausted and happy and more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. There she was at Sophia's 8th birthday party, already sick but hiding it well, determined to make her daughter's day perfect. I don't know how to do this without you, Marcus whispered to the image on his screen. I don't know how to live in a world where you don't exist. The photo didn't answer, of course. Caroline was gone, and no amount of grief or love or yearning would bring her back. He'd known that intellectually from the day she died. But knowing something in your head and accepting it in your heart were two different things. Marcus drained his whiskey and set the glass down with a decisive click. Friday dinner. He could manage Friday dinner. He could be polite to his daughter's friend and the woman who'd been kind enough to mother 2 grieving girls who weren't her own. He could do that much. It was just dinner. Grace Martinez stood in the cramped kitchen of her small apartment, expertly maneuvering around the limited counter space as she prepared lunches for 3 teenagers. At 45 years old, she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to do 10 things simultaneously without breaking a sweat. 2 jobs, 1 granddaughter, and 2 grieving teenagers who'd somehow become part of her makeshift family meant there was never enough time and always too much to do. "Grandma, you don't have to make my lunch," Emma called from the bathroom where she was presumably doing something elaborate with her hair. "I can buy lunch at school." "With what money?" Grace called back, spreading peanut butter on wheat bread with assembly line precision. "The money tree I'm growing in the living room hasn't fruited yet." She heard Emma's laugh and felt the familiar warmth that sound always brought. Her granddaughter was so much like her mother had been. Same bright spirit, same easy laugh, same way of lighting up a room just by entering it. Losing her daughter Maria 7 years ago had nearly destroyed Grace. She'd already been grieving the loss of her husband Roberto, who died of a heart attack the year before. Becoming Emma's sole guardian while drowning in her own grief had been the hardest thing she'd ever done. But it had also saved her. Emma needed her, and that need had given Grace a reason to get up every morning, to keep going, to find meaning in a life that had suddenly felt purposeless. "Mrs. Martinez, do you need help?" Lily Chen appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for school in her uniform. At 13, Lily was the same age as Emma but carried herself with a solemnity that seemed older. Losing her mother 6 months ago had aged her in ways that broke Grace's heart. "I've got it, sweetheart. But thank you for offering." Grace added the sandwiches to 3 brown bags along with fruit, crackers, and homemade cookies. "Did you finish your math homework?" Lily nodded. "Emma helped me with the last problem. I don't know what I'd do without you guys." "You do just fine because you're strong and brilliant," Grace said firmly, moving to give Lily a quick hug. "But I'm glad you don't have to do it alone." Lily had started coming over after school shortly after her mother's death, initially just to study with Emma. But gradually she'd stayed longer, through dinner and sometimes into the evening. Lily's father was a good man, but he worked long hours as a surgeon and was struggling with his own grief. He'd gratefully accepted Grace's offer to provide after-school care for Lily, insisting on paying her for it despite Grace's protests. That money, modest as it was, helped make ends meet. Grace worked as a nurse at a community clinic 3 days a week and cleaned houses the other 2 days. The nursing paid decently but not enough to cover everything in expensive New York City. The house cleaning was under the table but steady. Between those jobs and the small amount Lily's father gave her for childcare, Grace managed to keep them afloat. Barely. "So about this mother-daughter tea at school," Emma said, emerging from the bathroom with her dark hair twisted into an elaborate braid. "Sophia Wellington asked if she could join us. Is that okay, Grandma?" Grace felt a flash of recognition at the name. Wellington. As in Wellington Industries. Her dad is Marcus Wellington, yeah. Emma picked up her backpack. "But Sophia's not like that. You know, all rich and snobby. She's actually really cool. She goes to public school and takes the subway and everything. Her mom died 5 years ago, and I think she's struggling with this event just like we are." Grace's heart ached for another girl navigating grief. "Of course she can join us. The more the merrier." "There's just one thing," Emma continued, suddenly very interested in adjusting her backpack straps. "She invited us all to dinner at her place on Friday. To ask you in person. I said yes. I hope that's okay." Grace paused in the middle of packing the lunch bags. Dinner at the Wellington penthouse? She'd read about Marcus Wellington in magazines at the dentist's office, one of those impossibly wealthy, impossibly handsome billionaires who seemed to live in a different universe than regular people. The articles had mentioned his wife's death and his subsequent withdrawal from public life, but Grace had assumed he'd been managing well enough. Rich people had resources to deal with grief that regular people didn't. "Emma, I'm not sure that's a good idea," Grace began carefully. "People like the Wellingtons probably expect a certain kind of." "Sophia specifically said to tell you she wants to order pizza," Lily interjected. She said her dad agreed to keep it casual and that she just wants normal people and normal food. Please, Mrs. Martinez? Sophia's really nice, and I think she needs friends as much as Emma and I do. Grace looked at the hopeful faces of both girls and felt her resistance crumbling. How could she say no to that? All right. Friday dinner. But we are bringing dessert. I'm not showing up empty-handed. Both girls cheered, and Grace shook her head with a smile. What had she gotten herself into? The rest of the week passed in its usual controlled chaos. Grace worked her shifts at the clinic, where she dealt with everything from minor emergencies to chronic illness management in an underserved community that desperately needed more resources. She cleaned houses for 2 wealthy families in the Upper East Side, scrubbing other people's toilets while mentally calculating whether she could afford to replace Emma's worn-out winter coat before the weather turned truly cold. She picked up the girls from school, helped with homework, made dinners, and tried to be present for all the small moments that mattered. Emma's excitement about a science project, Lily's nervousness about an upcoming English presentation, the everyday victories and struggles of teenage life. At night, after the girls were asleep, Grace allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. The exhaustion that seemed to live in her bones. The worry about money that never quite went away. The grief for her husband and daughter that had become a constant companion rather than an acute pain. The loneliness that crept in during quiet moments. She'd loved Roberto with a fierce, consuming passion. They'd met when she was 19 and he was 21, and she'd known within a week that she would marry him. 33 years together, most of them happy, many of them hard, all of them worth it. He'd been her partner in every sense of the word, co-parent, best friend, lover, confidant. Losing him had felt like losing half of herself. And then, barely a year later, losing Maria had nearly finished the job. Her beautiful daughter, only 32 years old, gone in an instant because a drunk driver had run a red light. Grace had wanted to lie down and never get up again. But Emma needed her. And slowly, painfully, Grace had learned that the best way to honor the people you'd lost was to love the people who remained with everything you had. By Friday afternoon, Grace had worked herself into a state of nervous anxiety about dinner at the Wellington penthouse. She changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on a simple navy dress that was nice without trying too hard. She made her mother's famous flan, a dessert that had never failed to impress, and carefully packed it for transport. "Grandma, you look beautiful," Emma said, and Grace had to blink back unexpected tears. Her granddaughter was growing up so fast. "We all look beautiful," Lily added, and Grace smiled at both girls in their nice jeans and tops, young and hopeful and carrying their own grief but still managing to face the world with courage. The Wellington building was in Tribeca, a converted warehouse that had been transformed into luxury condominiums. The doorman, who was expecting them, directed them to a private elevator that required a key card. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. Grace's first thought was that the space was beautiful. High ceilings, exposed brick, massive windows offering panoramic views of the city. Her second thought was that it felt empty. Despite the elegant furniture and tasteful art, there was something hollow about the space, as if it were a beautifully staged set rather than a home where people actually lived. "You made it." Sophia appeared from somewhere deeper in the apartment, her face bright with genuine pleasure. "Mom, Mrs. Martinez, thank you so much for coming. And for bringing Emma and Lily." The slip, calling Grace Mom, seemed to embarrass Sophia, but it touched something deep in Grace's heart. "Please, call me Grace. And thank you for inviting us. Your home is beautiful." "My dad's around here somewhere," Sophia said, leading them toward what appeared to be a living area. "He's been anxious about tonight. I don't think he's had visitors in years, actually." They found Marcus Wellington standing near the windows, hands in his pockets, looking every inch the powerful billionaire from the magazine photos. He was even more striking in person, tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that filled the room. But when he turned to face them, Grace saw something else in his eyes. The same thing she saw in her own mirror every morning. Grief that had carved itself into the architecture of his face, loss that colored every expression, walls built so high that sunlight barely penetrated. She recognized it because she'd lived it. Still lived it, if she was honest. "Hello," Marcus said, and his voice was deep and carefully controlled. "Thank you for coming. Sophia has been looking forward to this." He shook hands with Grace, and she felt the brief contact register in an unexpected way. Awareness of him as a man rather than just a wealthy recluse. Notice of the way his eyes were the exact shade of the storm cloud she'd watched roll in that afternoon. Then he was shaking hands with Emma and Lily, and the moment passed. Grace pulled herself together. This was not the time to notice attractive men, and even if it were, someone like Marcus Wellington was so far out of her league they might as well be different species. She was here for the girls, nothing more. Dinner was indeed pizza. Several boxes of excellent New York pizza arranged on the dining table with paper plates and napkins. It was both charmingly casual and slightly awkward, as if Marcus Wellington wasn't quite sure how normal people ate. But the girls, bless them, filled any uncomfortable silences with easy chatter about school, friends, and the upcoming mother-daughter tea. Grace found herself watching Marcus as he watched his daughter. The love there was evident and almost painful in its intensity, as if Sophia were the only thing tethering him to earth, the only point of light in his personal darkness. Grace understood that feeling. After Roberto and Maria died, Emma had been her lifeline. Still was, in many ways. "So, Mrs. Martinez, Grace," Marcus said, clearly forcing himself to engage. "Sophia tells me you're a nurse." "At a community clinic in Queens," Grace confirmed. "And please, call me Grace. Mrs. Martinez makes me feel like I'm back in my grandmother's living room getting scolded for tracking mud on the carpet." The corner of Marcus's mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. "Grace, then. And the clinic, that must be rewarding work." "It is." Grace warmed to the subject. "Challenging, but rewarding. We serve a lot of uninsured families, people who fall through the cracks of the healthcare system. It's not glamorous, but it matters." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Respect, maybe, or interest. "Sophia mentioned you also clean houses." 2 days a week, yes. Grace saw no reason to be embarrassed about it. Honest work was honest work. It helps make ends meet, and the families I work for are kind. One of them lets me bring Emma along sometimes during school breaks, and their kids play together. "Grandma's being modest," Emma interjected. "She works like 80 hours a week and somehow still has energy to take care of me and Lily and cook amazing food and help with homework and—" "Emma, breathe." Grace laughed, touched and embarrassed by her granddaughter's praise. "I do what needs doing. Same as any parent." "Not every parent," Sophia said quietly, and the whole table fell silent for a moment, united in the understanding of what it meant to lose someone irreplaceable. Marcus cleared his throat. "Sophia mentioned you've been kind enough to include Lily in your family activities as well." "Lily is family," Grace said firmly, reaching over to squeeze Lily's hand. "Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up, who stays, who chooses to love you." She saw Marcus's expression shift, something raw and vulnerable breaking through his careful control for just a moment before he locked it away again. Grace recognized that look too, the desperate yearning for connection warring with the fear of being hurt again, the exhaustion of keeping your walls up while simultaneously resenting how isolated those walls made you feel. After dinner, Grace brought out the flan, which the girls declared the best dessert they'd ever had. Marcus tried a bite and something that might have been surprise crossed his face. "This is exceptional. Thank you." "My mother's recipe," Grace explained. "She was from Cuba, and she insisted that flan could fix most of life's problems. I'm not sure she was wrong." "If flan could fix problems, I'd hire you as my personal chef," Marcus said, and there was something almost like humor in his voice. "I don't think you could afford me," Grace shot back, surprising herself. "I have very high standards. My employer would need to meet my requirements for reasonable hours, respect for work-life balance, and a commitment to actually enjoying the food rather than just consuming it mechanically." The silence that followed made Grace wonder if she'd overstepped. She'd essentially just called out his workaholic tendencies and relationship with food. But then Marcus laughed. An actual, genuine laugh that transformed his whole face and made him look years younger. "Touché," he said, and his eyes met hers with something that might have been appreciation. "You'd be an expensive hire indeed." The rest of the evening passed more easily. The girls migrated to Sophia's room to listen to music and talk about whatever 13-year-olds talked about these days. That left Grace and Marcus in the living room, the awkwardness of forced adult interactions settling over them like a blanket. "Thank you for including Sophia in the tea," Marcus said finally, standing near the windows again as if they were his default position. "She's been looking forward to it. I know she misses having a mother for these kinds of events." "I'm happy to include her," Grace assured him. "And I understand what it's like, trying to fill a space that can't really be filled, trying to be enough when you know you're not what your child needs." Marcus turned to look at her, something sharp and searching in his gaze. "You think that? That you're not enough for Emma?" "Sometimes." Grace was surprised by her own honesty. Emma needs her mother. Lily needs her mother. Sophia needs her mother. We can love them and care for them and do our best, but we can't be what they lost. That's a hard truth to live with. "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "It is." They stood in silence for a moment, two people who'd been hollowed out by loss, who'd learned to keep functioning while carrying more weight than they'd ever imagined they could bear. "Caroline, my wife, died 5 years ago," Marcus said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they surprised Grace. "Cancer. We had 18 months from diagnosis to death, which the doctors said was generous. It didn't feel generous. It felt like watching her disappear in slow motion while being unable to stop it." Grace's throat tightened with empathy. "My husband died of a heart attack. 1 minute he was there, complaining about the Mets game, and the next minute he was on the floor and I was doing CPR and screaming for Emma to call 911. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. No warning, no goodbye, just gone." "I don't know which is worse," Marcus said. "Watching them slip away or having them vanish in an instant." "Both are terrible," Grace replied. "Just in different ways. With Roberto, I never got to prepare. I never got to say the things I wanted to say. But with Maria, my daughter, I had to watch her die too, in a way. She was brain dead from the accident, but they kept her on life support long enough for me to say goodbye, to donate her organs. So I got my goodbye, but I also had to choose to let her go. I had to sign the papers that ended my daughter's life." Her voice broke on the last words, and she was horrified to feel tears spilling down her cheeks. She never talked about this, certainly not to strangers, not to anyone really except Emma in their worst moments. Why was she spilling her heart to a man she'd just met? Marcus crossed the room and, to her surprise, handed her a handkerchief, an actual cloth handkerchief, like something from another era. "I am sorry. That's an inadequate thing to say, but I am sorry. No parent should have to make that choice." Grace wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "I am sorry. I don't usually fall apart in people's living rooms." "It's not falling apart to feel your grief," Marcus said quietly. "If anything, I think you're braver than I am. You're still engaging with life, still opening your heart to people like Lily and Sophia, even though you know what it costs to love someone and lose them. I've just sealed myself off. Safer that way." "Is it?" Grace looked up at him, this powerful man who seemed so terribly lonely. "Safer, I mean? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're suffocating." The words were too blunt, too honest, and Grace immediately regretted them. But Marcus didn't look offended. Instead, he looked startled, as if no one had dared to speak to him that directly in years. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "But I don't know how to be any other way anymore. After Caroline died, it felt like the world lost all its color. Everything became gray and flat and meaningless. The only thing that matters is Sophia, making sure she's okay, that she has what she needs. Everything else is just noise. But you matter too, Grace said gently. Your life, your happiness, your well-being, they matter. Not just for Sophia's sake, but for your own. You can't just be a father. You have to be a person too. Can't I? Marcus's smile was bitter. I've been doing a pretty good job of it so far. Have you? Grace challenged. Because your daughter is worried about you. She asked me to come to dinner not just because she wanted to come to the tea, but because she's hoping I might be able to help somehow. She's 13 years old and she's carrying the burden of her father's well-being on her shoulders. That's not fair to her. The words hit their mark. Grace saw Marcus flinch, saw guilt and pain cross his face. I know, he said roughly. I know she worries. I'm trying to do better. Then actually do better, Grace said, her voice firm but not unkind. I'm not saying you need to start dating or go to therapy or make some dramatic change. But you need to start living again, even in small ways. Have dinner with friends. Take up a hobby. Do something that brings you joy instead of just marking time until the next tragedy. You sound like Caroline, Marcus said, and there was wonder in his voice. She used to call me out on my bullshit just like that. Never let me hide behind work or excuses. Then she was a smart woman, Grace said. And she'd probably want you to actually honor her memory by living the life she can't have anymore, not by burying yourself alive. They were interrupted by the sound of teenage laughter from down the hall. The spell of the moment broke, and they both stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they'd been standing, how intimate this conversation had become. I should gather the girls, Grace said, checking her watch. It's getting late, and they have school tomorrow. Of course. Marcus's walls were back up, his expression carefully neutral. Thank you again for coming. And for agreeing to include Sophia in the tea. As Grace collected Emma and Lily and prepared to leave, Sophia hugged her with surprising fierceness. Thank you, Mrs. Martinez. Tonight meant a lot to my dad. I could tell. Grace hugged her back, this motherless girl who was trying so hard to take care of her grieving father. You're welcome, sweetheart. And it meant a lot to me too. In the elevator on the way down, Emma gave her a knowing look. So, Mr. Wellington is pretty cool, huh? Emma Rose Martinez, Grace warned. Don't even start. I'm just saying, Emma continued, undeterred. He's single, you're single, you both have daughters who are friends, you both understand grief. And we are also from completely different worlds, Grace interrupted. He's a billionaire, Emma. I clean houses for a living. We had one dinner together for your sake, not because we are going to become best friends or anything else. If you say so, Emma said, but her expression suggested she didn't believe it for a second. That night, lying in bed in her small apartment with Emma asleep in the next room, Grace replayed the evening in her mind. She thought about Marcus Wellington's eyes, the way grief had carved itself into his features, the brief moment when he'd laughed and looked almost happy. She thought about his admission that he was suffocating, that he'd stopped living and started just existing. She recognized all of it because she'd felt all of it herself. Still felt it sometimes, on the hard days when the weight of everything threatened to crush her. The difference was that she'd had to keep going because Emma needed her. She'd been forced to engage with life because she couldn't afford to check out, financially or emotionally. Marcus Wellington had the luxury of wealth, which meant he could build fortress walls and hide behind them without consequence. Or so she thought. The mother-daughter tea was held in the school's decorated auditorium on a Saturday afternoon. Grace arrived with her 3 girls, Emma, Lily, and now Sophia, feeling both proud and overwhelmed. The other mothers were dressed expensively, carried designer handbags, and spoke in the confident tones of women who'd never worried about making rent. But then Sophia grabbed her hand and squeezed. Thank you for being here, the girl whispered. My dad offered to donate a new library to the school if that would let him attend instead, but I told him I'd rather have you. Grace's heart melted completely. There's nowhere else I'd rather be, sweetheart. The afternoon was actually lovely. They drank tea from delicate china cups, ate tiny sandwiches and pastries, and participated in activities designed to strengthen mother-daughter bonds. Grace watched her three girls laugh together, watched them support each other through the moments that were harder, when they had to talk about their mothers, when they had to share favorite memories, when the absence of what they'd lost pressed close. "You're good at this," another mother said to Grace during a quiet moment. The woman introduced herself as Jennifer Hartman, mother to one of Emma's classmates. "Taking care of girls who aren't your own. Not everyone would do that." "They needed someone," Grace said simply. "And I had love to give. It's not complicated. Isn't it?" Jennifer looked thoughtful. "I think it's incredibly complicated and incredibly brave. You've opened your heart to more loss, more pain. That takes courage." Grace had never thought of it that way. She'd just done what needed doing, what felt right. But maybe Jennifer was right. Maybe choosing to love again after devastating loss was its own kind of bravery. When she dropped Sophia back at the Wellington building that evening, Marcus was waiting in the lobby. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "Could we talk for a moment? I'll have Richard drive the girls up while we chat." Grace agreed, curiosity overriding her caution. They walked to a nearby coffee shop, and Marcus bought them both coffee, though he seemed uncertain about the process, as if he hadn't ordered his own coffee in years. "I wanted to thank you," he said once they were seated. "Sophia called me during the tea. She was crying, but they were happy tears. She said she felt like she had a mother again, just for an afternoon, and that it was the best day she'd had in 5 years." Grace's eyes stung with tears. "She's a special girl. You've raised her well." "I don't know about that." Marcus stared into his coffee. "I've just tried not to completely mess her up. But Grace, what you said last week, about me suffocating, about not being fair to Sophia to make her carry my grief, you were right. I've been thinking about it all week." "I'm sorry if I overstepped," Grace began, but Marcus held up a hand. "Don't apologize. You said what I needed to hear. What I've needed to hear for 5 years, but no one's had the courage to tell me." He took a breath. "I want to change. I don't know how, exactly, but I want to try. And I was wondering if you might help me." Grace blinked in surprise. "Help you?" "Marcus, I'm not a therapist or a life coach or—" "No, you're someone who's been through what I'm going through and come out the other side still capable of joy, still capable of loving people, still engaged with life." Marcus's eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I don't know how you did it, but I want to learn." "I didn't have a choice," Grace said honestly. "Emma needed me. I couldn't afford to fall apart completely. I had to keep working, keep functioning, keep living because giving up wasn't an option." "Maybe that's what I need then," Marcus said. "Someone who won't let me hide. Someone who'll call me out when I'm making excuses. Someone who understands grief but refuses to let it win." Grace studied him carefully. "What exactly are you asking for?" "Friendship," Marcus said simply. "I'm asking if we could be friends. If maybe we could have dinner sometimes, the 4 of us, you, me, Sophia, Emma. If you could teach me how to live again." It was such a vulnerable request, delivered with such obvious difficulty, that Grace couldn't refuse even if she'd wanted to. "Friends," she agreed. "But Marcus, I have to be honest, I don't know your world. I don't do galas or charity dinners or whatever it is billionaires do. My life is small and ordinary and probably boring to someone like you." "Small and ordinary sounds perfect," Marcus said, and he smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "I'm tired of my world, Grace. I want to remember what normal feels like." Over the following months, something unexpected bloomed between them. They started having dinner together regularly, sometimes at Marcus's penthouse, sometimes at Grace's tiny apartment where Marcus looked comically out of place on her second-hand furniture. They took the girls to museums, to the park, to the movies. They talked about their lost loves, their fears, their hopes for their daughters. Marcus started coming to the clinic where Grace worked, initially just to donate money but then to actually volunteer. He rolled up his sleeves and helped with filing, with patient transport, with whatever was needed. Grace watched him interact with people who had nothing, saw how his carefully constructed walls began to crack when faced with real human need. "You're good at this," she told him one day after he'd spent an hour talking to an elderly patient about her grandchildren while Grace changed her wound dressing. "Connecting with people. You've just forgotten how." "I'd forgotten a lot of things," Marcus admitted. "But being here, doing work that actually matters, it helps. You help." Grace felt her heart skip in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. She was falling for him. It was foolish and dangerous and completely impractical, but it was happening anyway. This brilliant, wounded man who was slowly learning to live again. How could she not love him? But she kept her feelings locked away. Marcus had trusted her with his grief and his healing, but that didn't mean he was ready for more. Might never be ready. And that was okay. She could be his friend, could help him find his way back to life, could love him from a safe distance. Or so she told herself. It was Sophia who finally forced the issue. 9 months after that first dinner, she cornered Grace at the apartment while Marcus was picking up Emma from a school event. "You love him," Sophia said without preamble. "And he loves you. Why are you both pretending you don't?" Grace felt panic rise in her chest. "Sophia, it's not that simple." "Why not?" The girl's eyes were fierce. "My mom is gone. I will always love her and miss her, but she's gone. And my dad has been a ghost for 5 years, just going through the motions, not really living. But you made him come alive again. You made him laugh. You made him care about things. Why can't you be together?" "Because I'm terrified," Grace admitted, the truth spilling out. "I'm terrified of losing someone else I love. I'm terrified that I'm not enough, that I can't fill your mother's shoes, that your father will realize I'm just a poor woman who cleans houses and you're the bravest, kindest, most amazing person I know besides my mom," Sophia interrupted. "Mrs. Martinez, Grace, don't you see? My dad doesn't need someone to fill Mom's shoes. He needs someone to walk beside him in her own shoes. He needs you, exactly as you are." Grace was crying now, this 13-year-old girl's wisdom cutting straight to her heart. What if it doesn't work? What if I'm wrong? What if you're right? Sophia countered. What if you both spend the rest of your lives alone because you were too scared to try? Is that really better? That night, after the girls were asleep, Grace and Marcus found themselves alone on the penthouse terrace, looking out at the city lights. The air was warm with early summer, and Grace felt her courage gathering. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He turned to her, and in the soft light, she could see how much he'd changed in the past months. The hard edges had softened. The walls had come down. He looked alive in a way he hadn't that first night. "I'm listening," he said. "I love you," Grace said simply. "I know it's complicated and probably foolish and maybe you don't feel the same way, but I love you. Not because I'm trying to replace Caroline or because I want your money or for any reason except that you're you, wounded and brave and learning to live again and absolutely wonderful." Marcus stared at her, emotions flickering across his face too quickly to name. For a terrible moment, Grace thought she'd made a catastrophic mistake. Then he crossed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've loved you for months, but I was too afraid to say it. Afraid I'd be betraying Caroline. Afraid I'd lose you like I lost her. Afraid I'd forgotten how to be anything except broken." "You're not broken," Grace whispered. "You're healing. We both are." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and setting out on a new journey all at once. It felt like grief acknowledged and hope embraced. It felt like two people who'd been shattered finding a way to be whole again, not despite their brokenness but because of it. 2 years later, Grace stood in the garden of the small estate Marcus had bought in Westchester, watching Emma and Sophia help Lily hang decorations for the wedding. Her wedding. In an hour, she would marry Marcus Wellington, and the thought filled her with joy and only the smallest tremor of fear. "You look beautiful, Emma Amor," her mother-in-law-to-be said, adjusting Grace's simple but elegant dress. Marcus's mother had flown in from Florida, a warm woman who'd welcomed Grace with open arms and tears of gratitude for bringing her son back to life. "I'm nervous," Grace admitted. "Is that silly?" "Not silly at all." The older woman squeezed her hand. "You're starting a new chapter. But Grace, I want you to know, you've already given us so much. You gave us back Marcus. You gave Sophia a mother's love again. You've reminded this family what joy feels like." Through the window, Grace could see Marcus talking with Emma, his soon-to-be stepdaughter. They were laughing about something, heads close together, and Grace felt her heart swell with love. He'd embraced Emma completely, never trying to replace her grandfather but simply adding his own presence to her life with genuine care and affection. The ceremony was small and perfect, just family and close friends gathered in the garden. When Marcus saw Grace coming down the makeshift aisle, his eyes filled with tears. She walked toward him not as a replacement for what he'd lost but as something new, something precious in its own right. "I never thought I could love again," Marcus said during his vows, his voice carrying to every corner of the quiet garden. "I thought my heart had died with Caroline. But Grace, you taught me that love doesn't work that way. Love isn't finite. The love I had for Caroline doesn't diminish because I love you. My heart didn't die, it just needed someone brave enough to help it heal. You are that someone. You are my second chance, my new beginning, my reminder that life goes on and can still be beautiful." Grace's own vows were simpler. "I promise to walk beside you, not behind you or ahead of you. I promise to honor the past while building the future. I promise to love you and Sophia with everything I have. And I promise that we'll face whatever comes together, because love is stronger than grief, and hope is stronger than fear." When they kissed as husband and wife, their daughters cheered along with everyone else. Emma and Sophia stood together, holding Lily between them, 3 girls who'd learned that family wasn't just about blood but about choice and love and showing up for each other. At the reception, Grace danced with Marcus under the stars, swaying to music that felt like a promise of more good days ahead. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for not giving up on me, for teaching me to live again." "Thank you," Grace replied, "for being brave enough to try, for opening your heart even when it was terrifying, for choosing love over fear." Later, Emma found her way to Grace's side. "Mom," she said, and Grace's heart still caught every time Emma called her that, even though she'd been doing it for over a year now. "I think Grandma Maria and Grandpa Roberto would be happy. That you found love again. That you're happy." Grace pulled her granddaughter close. "I think they would be too. And Emma, I want you to know, loving Marcus and Sophia doesn't mean I love them or your mother or your grandfather any less. Love just expands to hold everyone." "I know," Emma said. "That's what you taught me. That's what you taught all of us." As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Grace looked around at her expanded family, Marcus and Sophia, Emma, and Lily, friends new and old, people who'd walked through grief and come out the other side still capable of joy. She thought about the long journey that had brought them all here, about the losses that had nearly destroyed them and the love that had ultimately saved them. She thought about that first dinner, how terrified Marcus had been to let anyone into his fortress of solitude, how certain she'd been that their worlds were too different to ever really connect. She thought about all the small moments since then, conversations over coffee, laughter during movie nights, tears shared during hard days, the gradual building of trust and affection and finally love. Life after loss wasn't about replacing what you'd had. It wasn't about forgetting or moving on or any of the platitudes people offered in sympathy cards. It was about learning to carry your grief while still making room for joy. It was about honoring the past while refusing to let it imprison your future. It was about believing that your shattered heart could heal in new configurations, that love could bloom again in unexpected places, that second chances were real and precious and worth the risk of trying. Marcus came to her side as the party wound down, slipping his arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I imagined I could be again," Grace admitted. "And you?" "Same." He kissed her temple. "Grace, I know we are going to have hard days still. Grief doesn't just disappear because we fell in love. There will be moments when we miss Caroline and Roberto and Maria so much it hurts. But we'll face those moments together. And that makes all the difference." "Together," Grace agreed, leaning into his embrace. "That's the secret, isn't it? None of us can do this alone. We need each other, for the grief and for the joy and for everything in between." As the stars wheeled overhead and their daughters laughed in the background and their future stretched out before them full of possibility, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something strong enough to coexist with it. Not forgetting what she'd lost, but honoring it by living fully in what remained. She had loved and lost and loved again. She had been broken and had healed into something new. She had let people into her heart despite knowing what it cost to love someone and lose them. And in doing so, she had discovered that the risk was always, always worth it. Because in the end, love was what saved us. Love was what made us human. Love was what gave meaning to the brief, precious, painful, beautiful time we had on this earth. And Grace Martinez Wellington, nurse, house cleaner, grandmother, mother, friend, and now wife, had learned to love with her whole broken, healing, courageous heart. And that made all the difference. Thank you, my wonderful family, for staying till the end of today's story. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, like, and share, so that love, hope, and healing can travel far and reach someone who needs it tonight. May the Almighty fill your homes with laughter, your days with light that never fades, and your hearts with peace that passes all understanding. May every dream you nurture find its season to bloom, and may your love remain the strength of every tomorrow. Until we meet again, walk in faith, speak with kindness, and keep your hearts open to love. This is Sammy Stories, where every heart finds a home. Amen.